My name is Jesse Reichler. I'm a programmer at donationcoder.com, and I have a YouTube channel called Co-op for Two. And today I'm going to show you another one of my OBS plugins called jrBorder for creating, let's say, front camera insets with a nice border around them in OBS. This might be used for if you're showing a top-down camera or maybe an image from a website or a tablet and you want to have your face in a corner of the screen or something. Standard picture-in-picture effect. Now you can do this in OBS using existing built-in filters and masks, and there are a bunch of nice tutorials on YouTube showing you how to do this, and I'll just quickly show you the basic overview of the standard way you would do this and why you might want to use my plugin to make it a little easier. So here's a scene. We've just got some patterned background to help us see the inset. Here's the picture-in-picture inset of my front camera. You can see this is how you would normally do it. So here's the current scene I'm in. It's just got two sources in it. One is the background image, and then this is at least one way you might do it in OBS. I've created an additional scene called helper front camera scene, which is here, and then I've added that scene to this scene, and I've resized it to be a little smaller. So here it is. That's the inset image, the picture-in-picture image. Now if you want to see what this scene is, how you would create this scene, we can click over to this. Here is the scene which is being used as a source. It's a little difficult to wrap your head around, but here is the scene, which just consists of the front camera shrunken down. Now the reason you make it its own scene is that so you can do other things to it, like adding a border. So I've, just as an example, I've made a little colored source. So if you wanted to, and I've put it behind the image, and so here you would have to go in here and either get this the right size to be a border, or you could resize it. For example, I could oversize it and then crop it down to be around the image. And now when I go back to my scene, you can see here it is. It stuck this scene in as a picture-in-picture, and you could reuse this scene here on other scenes. If you wanted to have your picture-in-picture a little bigger in the upper left on a different scene, you could just now move this as the bordered inset and resize it. That's now a reusable little source that you can plop on any other scenes. And if we go back to it, you could see you could do other things. For example, if you wanted to crop in a little bit, make this square, I could do this. Remember, this is all the standard way you would do this in OBS. At least one more. So I would do that, then I'd go back to my background border, shrink that in a little bit. If I wanted to change the color, I could change the color of the rectangle, and there you have it. And now when I go in my other scenes, it's where it is. If I wanted to, I guess I'd want to probably move that over here. So I'd move this over like that, and then we come back, and there it is, as expected. Okay, that's the traditional way you would do it, or at least one way, and you can get fancier here. If you wanted to, instead of having a rectangular border, you could add a crop to the scene, and not to the video source, because that would crop every example of the video source, but you could go and crop the scene with a filter. Here's a circular mask which is using a file, which is a white circle, That's creating a circular mask. Now you can see it's sort of problematic because when I used my crop, it didn't, when I cropped in on it and enlarged it, it didn't quite work. So I'd have to undo that. And this is the standard, this is the problem with using the default, this default way to create these masks. It's a little finicky and custom. Like this round mask is a custom file. And when you want to do cropping and stuff and zooming, it can get a little hairy, their interactions. But essentially you can still, whoops, let me not move the background. You can still do the same thing. And if you wanted to put a round circular border around it, you could go find a PNG file that's semi-transparent, which has a ring of color, whatever. Then you would go back to here, you would drop it on top of your, whoops, you would drop it on top of your cropped camera. You'd resize it to make it fit, and then you would overlay it, get it exactly where you want it, the right size, and then you'd go back, and there you'd have your front inset that was now a circular thing. Okay, so that's the normal way you can do it. You can absolutely do it with built-in OBS stuff. It's just a little finicky, but you can get it to look the way you want. And I'm not gonna, the plugin that I've written, the new border plugin, doesn't do anything that you, doesn't let you create a look that you couldn't get through built-in OBS stuff, but it lets you do it a little more easily. So let's switch to my new scene with my new border plugin. Okay. So here's the scene, and it's got two items in the scene, just like before. It's got a background pattern. And then in this case, rather than use a separate scene where I'm going to put my small version of my front camera, I've created a cloned version of the video capture source. And I've done that using Exceldro's source clone plugin, which is fantastic. You could also just use create another scene just like I did traditionally. The whole reason for creating those fake scenes that you use as sources is so that you can put filters on them that don't affect any other instances of that video camera. So in this case, I've created a clone so that I can create a new filter on that clone. Okay, so here's the filter I've added. jrBorder. I'm going to select it here so you can see the options. It's got enough options that it's hard to fit it on screen, at least for this recording, but here we go. So here are the options. They're all disabled for now, but let me show you and put them on. So the first thing is we can enable the border. So there's the border. You can see I've turned on the border here. It's a rectangle. I've said mask the contents inside. Let's ignore that option for now. This option here, so these are all ways to fine tune it. Constrain means whatever size I've got here, the border will go inside that and either resize the inner contents or put the border on top of them. If you uncheck this, you basically, if you uncheck this, you change this to grow, you're basically enlarging the size of the image. Okay, but it did nothing. Is it because of that? No, it's because of this here. Okay, so if I change this from constrain to grow, you can see it's preserving the original size of this image, whatever it is, and putting the border on the outside of it. If you put constrain, it keeps it within the original size and shrinks the image inside it. This option here interacts with this, and it says whether the border is on top of the image or whether it shrinks the image. So when it's like this, it's not shrinking the image to fit, it's putting the border on top of it. So we're losing a few pixels on the original image, whereas if I'm over here, we've got every pixel from the original image, but the border is added. And for the rectangular mask, there'd be very little purpose for doing that, but you'll see for circular mask, you'll want this to be here. Okay, so there's that, and now I can change the border width. So you can see one of the advantages, and if we do this, you'll see it'll shrink it, the entire image, as I go in so that it preserves it. And here it's on top of it. And you can see already the basic advantage of this plugin, this new filter, is that you can mess with all of these options without having to manually move around a color source behind the image and get it exactly right. It just makes it much easier to tweak and get things the way you want them. Okay, there's the color of the border. We could change it just like we did for the other one easily. Let me go back to white for a second here. You can actually change the transparency, which will show a little bit of the background through it. Okay, so that's the basic border. You can make a custom border pattern, which I'll enable here, which basically lets you use this pattern format here to create sort of rings around it. So you can see it starts, it says 2 pixel border of the white, then a 20 pixel border of the second color, which is black and transparent, and then a thin 2 pixel border of this white, which gives us this white, black, white. You can change any of these individually, and they're scaled up with the border width. So you can see the effect. Again, I've set this border to be semi-transparent here, 153, but if I made this 255, you wouldn't be able to see through it. Let's put this back to something semi-transparent. Okay, and then again, advantages, you can mess with all these things without having to hand move things around. Okay, so that's rectangular border. There's also a circular border, which is the same thing except it's circular. Now you'll notice it's trying to make it elliptical around the whole thing, which looks a little odd, but I'll show you how you might mess with that later. Again, I can turn off the custom border. That just gets us this. We can change the size, etc. Okay, so now with that circular border, let me show you a little bit about the cropping and scaling. So if you were doing an inset, it would be pretty common that you might want to crop in a little bit on the sides. So let me hope that I've got this configured the way I want. I think it's this that I want here. Okay, so let me enable the crop and scale options. Okay, so I've enabled crop and scale, and now I have control of them here. So here you can see I can expand to the left. I'm cropping out left and right to get it the right aspect ratio. And in fact, once you've got your crop basically right, you can come down to the pan to just move around a little bit to get it centered exactly where you want. You've got pan X and Y here. You can also, if you want, tweak the aspect ratio. So for example, let's say it was really important that I get in a little bit more to the left and right. Maybe you've got 2 people in here, and so you need to show, but then you also want it to be rounded, so you can come and tweak the aspect ratio a little bit. You're stretching the image a little, but maybe if you're just doing it a tiny bit, it won't be noticeable, or maybe you like to make yourself look a little thinner. That's the aspect ratio tweak. We can also here scale the entire thing. Now, you could do that scaling just by clicking and dragging on this. You're rescaling the entire source. The difference here is you'll notice it's OBS doing the scaling here. So if I click to drag and rescale here, you'll notice the border is going to get bigger too, which may be what you want. However, if you use the scaling inside the filter, it doesn't scale the border. So you'll see if I go big, I've still got the same exact size border I chose. This can be particularly useful if you want to scale in, if you've got something that's not square shaped aspect ratio, when you rescale it with OBS, you might be enlarging the top and bottom borders more than the left and right. Anyway, so there you can scale it from within here, and it won't affect the border size. Okay, so far so good. Let me make this border a little bigger here. You can see there's some weird effects with the circular masks. If I change this, you can see what's happened here. I've told it to put the circle on the outside, and because it's a rectangular source, it doesn't know how to fill in the parts that are cropped out. You might fix that just by cropping less, but essentially you probably, for a circular mask, want to put this out here. Okay, so let me show you a couple other things. So I showed you for the border, you can have just a single color. You can use a custom pattern like that. You could also put a custom texture. So I'm going to click this. I've got a texture image here. It's just a square image with a gradient, but you can see it's lighter here, darker here. You can change that. You can actually combine that texture, and notice that it will handle whatever size you make it fine, and I can rescale the whole thing, etc. It can use any image file here, and then you can actually put the custom border on top of it like that and choose how much to blend in the custom border. We could, if we check this, I think, yeah, if we check this box, it's going to crop out what's inside that border, even with the transparency. So there you go. And if you blend it here, here's the pure gradient image. Let me turn this off, and here it is blending it in with the colors of the custom border pattern. If I turn this off, you can see it'll scale between the pure gradient and the white. So you could take your gradient and then mix it with whatever color you chose here. That's pure gradient. Here it is mixed in halfway with the color I've chosen, and here it is just the pure color I've chosen. Let's go back. All right, so that's background texture option, and you can combine all of these. In fact, sometimes you might turn off your border, but just use this crop and scale if you wanted to just pan around and do that. Okay, so let's put the border back. Background texture. I'm going to turn this off for a second, and I will show you the last little set of options here. In addition to the rectangle and the circle, you can use a custom mask file. So I'm going to say custom mask file, and here I have one that I've loaded up. It's this image here. So when you choose a custom mask file, you've got 3 different types. The last one here I'm using, full color chroma, is doing 2 things. It's using a PNG file that's got green in the center and transparency outside this. So basically you can create a mask that says what area should you show through the camera, the image, and what area is transparent through to the background. And if I say black versus white, well, that's kind of confusing, isn't it? It doesn't really help you much. Okay, so you select the mask file and then what type it is. So this is the more advanced mask file, which has got this is an image with transparency in green here. The more simple mask that we're used to is something like, well, let me just show you another example about it. Let's see, this one. Okay, this one just has a little shape. Everything's in here, and we could put the gradient image on top of that border or blend it in. And then this blends it in a different way. There's the pure gradient. There's the border color. All right, let me now show you a different kind of mask. So those are more advanced masks with green in the center and transparency. But a more standard mask that you'll find online for webcams is something like this, of black for the background and white for the foreground. So I'm going to click this one. Okay, so when you load in a mask like this, you need to tell it, okay, this is a black versus white mask. All right, so you can see what it is. Where the mask had white is your image or your camera shining through, and where it's black is the background, except here, unlike the previous masks, if we go back to this for a second and use a full color chroma mask, I don't have control over the border width here. The only thing I can do is control sort of how the image fits into this border. I could resize this whole thing, of course, but I can't control the thickness of these border lines because this plugin, it's an arbitrary mask. It doesn't know anything about what's borders. But if we switch to a standard mask, I'm going to go slightly medium rounded. Okay, so I'm switching to this kind of mask, and I'm going to say black versus white mask. Okay, so here it is. It's used this rounded border, which is the shape of this mask, and you could use a round one, whatever. However, for these black and white masks, the plugin can figure out how to create its own border. So in this case, you do have control over the thickness of the border. So here I can control how thick I want the border, and then the color of the border, and again, background textures. So you could change this to look however you wanted, or blend it in with the gradient border. So all of the black and white masks, and you could choose different ones based on your source. For example, if we use this circular one here, this is a different way to get a circle, but it could be an arbitrary shape. It can be a weird jagged shape, whatever. But because it's this kind of mask, the plugin can control the width of the border. The only thing you can't do when using a mask file for your border pattern is you can't use a custom border where there was 3 pixels white, 10 pixels black, etc. You don't have it for that because for this border, the plugin is just figuring out everything on the border between the white and the black mask is border width. Okay, so there you have it. There's your jrBorder filter plugin that lets you easily create and customize border effects. Now, the only other thing that I'm almost hesitant to show because it's such a specialized use, and I should say down at the bottom you can see the impact on CPU. This has been designed to be very, very ultra minimal CPU impact. Once it does all of its border rendering, whatever it is, gradients, circles, masks, it caches it. And so when it's actually rendering it, it's not doing any of those computations. It's pre-rendered this border, whatever mode you use, and just draws it on top and scales. So it's designed to be very minimal impact once you've configured it. While you're configuring it and you're changing options, it may take a bit of a hit. Okay, so the only other thing to show you is something a bit more advanced that you will no doubt never have use for, but I'll just show you. If we go in, let's see, what's the easiest way to show this? I'm going to turn off this border filter. So here's our just front cam image on this scene. So most of the ways you would use this plugin is you would go and add a filter either to a scene or to a cloned source. And that's what we're doing. We've added this filter here. But there is an alternative way to use this plugin, and that is as an additional source. So let me just show you. Here I've got my video camera source, and we could crop it any way we want to get it where we want. And now I'm going to add a new source, but I'm going to add a jrBorder source. This is going to be a little weird. So I'm adding a new source like this. Okay. Now the new source has much of the same options as you saw in the filter. For example, you can do rectangle, whatever, different shapes. You can configure the color, but you'll see something different here. Targeting size and location. It says hook signals and events, adjust position now. All right, so what has this done? You can see there's the border around it. It's not a filter anymore, though. It's an additional source. And I'm going to keep this unchecked. Now I'm just going to show you. This is much like the traditional way you would do it in OBS, where you put a square color behind the source. And that's what we've got here. This is now behind this source. And if I move it, you'll see I move it out of the way. Here it is. And if I resize this, this isn't adjusting. But if we go into this source, let me move this out of the way so you can see it. I'm going to click this button here, and it's going to pop over to this image and resize to meet it. Ready? Go. Okay. And then if I check this, well, oh, I'm sorry, you couldn't quite see that because I moved it out of the way. Okay. If I check this box, so there's the one that adjusts it right now. So if I make this smaller and click this button, it'll resize it to fit. If I click this box, it'll keep it there. So watch when I close these options now. Now if I move this around, it follows it. There's a little bit of delay. You can almost see it. And if I resize, it'll grow with it. If I crop, it'll grow with it. So this lets you use all the normal features of your OBS sources to do any cropping or resizing. And it's basically maintaining the size and position of this additional color source to match, to be right on top of it. And it'll actually grow into it if you set various options on this that you tell it you want, for example, to go into it. Now it's actually sitting on top of it. So the question is, why on earth would you ever use this source version of this plugin on top of it? And there are a couple of maybe unusual use cases for it. Let me go put this on the outside again. One use case might be if you need this, if this is some giant 8K source or whatever, and you wanted to have as minimal impact on CPU as possible, then this version is basically just drawing this as its own pure thing. It's not messing with this source at all. The other reason might be if, and also the other advantage of this is it doesn't need an embedded scene, it doesn't need a virtual scene, it doesn't need a cloned source. This could be just the regular video capture source, because here you're not putting a filter on it, so you wouldn't necessarily need to use a clone. You could also put this on top of anything. So just to show you, if we bring in, well, let me not even bother to show you. The other possible advantage of it is if I wanted to extend this ability to track an existing source to let you use any source as a border. For example, you could have a video file that resizes itself and borders around another source, or a browser, etc. Right now that's not supported, but it would be easy to do. It's separate code for matching the size, etc. Okay, so there you have it. Let's just leave it back here. Let's go back to this one. So there you have it, jrBorder, a plugin for creating picture-in-picture insets that are nicely bordered with lots of options. Maybe it'll be useful to you. Again, nothing you can't do with normal OBS, just makes it a little easier to do something that is a common request of people. I'll see you on the next video.